So welcome, I am Sanna Viitanen from FITech Network University, and I'm here joined, apart from our panelists, by two colleagues from FITech, Johanna and Fanny, who are helping the host this webinar. Can I get the next slide, Johanna? So here is our program. First, Hannele Holtinen and Heidi Palatie will explain to you about wind power project development, what it is. And then we will hear some exciting career stories from Iko and Ilona. There is a QA panel available for you, so you can post questions on the Q&A panel. Time allowing, we will take some questions from there orally, or on those moments you can raise your hand and ask a question. But the host will unmute you if such a possibility arises and you want to ask something. And in the end, you will get some information where to find training. But without further ado, let's see the next slide, please. Just very quickly about FITech Network University. So it's a consortium of all those Finnish universities that have master's level training in the field of science and technology, engineering, plus technology industries of Finland and the academic architects and engineers in Finland. And from FITech, you can find a variety of free of charge university courses that are open for everyone. And can we see the next slide? So the webinar is recorded and we will share the recording at fitech.io, but the attendees are not seen or heard except for the case if you want to place a question orally. So as I mentioned, use the Q&A panel. If you want to address a certain panelist, please indicate it in your question. And thank you for joining and enjoy the webinar. I now give the floor to Heidi and Hannele. And I think I can also open your camera, Hannele, just a moment.
Hello, meanwhile working on Hannele's camera, I can start. So I'm Heidi Palatie from the Finnish Wind Power Association, and the association is about to expand its activities to cover also large-scale solar power. But today we are talking more about wind. That's a picture taken by Hannele in Pori-Tahkoluoto wind farm. So a lot of the content partly goes also to offshore wind power, but mainly we are now talking from the corner of onshore wind power. Do we have Hannele online?
Yes, we have. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so welcome from my part as well. I have just started as a professor of practice in Aalto University in the topic of wind energy, and I have my first course starting in the fall that will also be part of this FITech courses available to you all. And my background is from VTT, the research center, so I've been working in the research sector on wind energy since the end of 80s, so I have a long background in different aspects of wind energy. And Heidi, what was your path to start working with wind?
Well, I studied environmental policy and then corporate environmental management, and I've been with the association over 12 years and working the time together with Anni Mikkonen, who is our CEO, and we used to study together. So pretty randomly, I had studied learned some communications in previous jobs, and I came to work in association by random coincidence, but with first tasks being much about communications. So that's a good example of with how many different kinds of backgrounds one can enter wind industry, and very different types of skills skills are really needed in this industry. And now we're talking about wind, but at least come work in energy. The world is using all the time growing amount of energy, and we will need energy always. So it's not about good or bad times. Energy is always needed. So I'm pretty sure talents will always have a job in energy.
That's right. And it's a really fascinating area to work with, energy generally and wind energy specifically. We could perhaps go on for our first content slide, please. So indeed, it is very fast growing sector, wind energy, part of renewables that have very high targets to reach net zero carbon targets that all the countries and globally have set. So wind energy is basically a mature and commercial technology. However, it's still evolving. We get larger turbines, we get new ideas how to install them on land and offshore. And really the industry is very dynamic. A lot of young people, a lot of enthusiast people work there. So it's a very, very nice environment to work in. And as you already heard, variety of skills are required already from us too. I'm an engineer, and we have very many various backgrounds working here, and generally interdisciplinarity is of value. Both if you have a different background and you want to study something else, but also in a team, having different persons working there, all talents, all educational levels are needed there. To fulfill the targets means that we should build more and more wind energy, and this means that more and more people will need to be employed in the sector. Regarding the education, so just to have a specific wind energy education is still limited. So many universities and also IMCO level, they have a lot of courses in wind energy already available. But to have a full study program on wind energy, we don't have that in Finland. We have in some other European countries. However, the companies are pretty used to employing new talent and training them in-house. And also, as the development is fast, you would still need to stay on top of the latest developments, and whatever you study will partly become old knowledge after some years. Anything else you want to say, Heidi, about this before we go through all the different types? We actually will probably spend most of our time in the next slide.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the last point may be that a lot of companies are being established, are expanding their activities to Finland, all that. So also a lot of young people have made quick career moves within wind. So there's a lot of positions available all the time. So also in that sense that you can enter as a young talent, and it is from that starting point possible to move on if that's something one wants.
That's right. So then if we move to the next slide, which is our sort of main content slide. So we thought that we would just give you some idea of timeline for wind energy project as part of wind energy deployment. So basically you have these different phases like pre-screening, then going to planning and permitting, then preparing for construction, finally construction, and after construction also the production phase, and finally the dismantling phase. And for all these phases there are people who need to work there and different kinds of people. So for example, for the pre-screening, you would start by looking for sites, doing a sort of basic pre-feasibility screening of the sites, and then finding a site, checking whether it's feasible, can you get the land use contracts, land use leases, generally, you need project management, you need experts in all this screening with the data, different types of data. So, Heidi, what kind of companies are working there? What kind of people are they employing at this stage?
Well, sometimes it has been said that doing wind power project development, especially in this pre-screening phases, takes an ability to drink a lot of coffee and sit in a car and drive. So it's a lot of meeting people, especially the land use negotiation, but also a lot of working with different types of spatial data, all data that is available. So that kind of skill is also needed in addition to drinking coffee skills, which of course Finns are very strong in. But this would take from some weeks, up to a year maybe. So altogether, the project development takes maximum of 12 years, 8 being pretty average. So this is rather short period anyway in the starting point, and like typically a lot of areas are looked into, and then a lot of projects also, or early phase projects also die in this phase. So it takes guts, I would say, also persistence.
Yes, indeed. And also in the planning and permitting phase, many projects die. So you need to have a sort of larger portfolio, and then you start doing the environmental studies like UVA, the environmental impact assessment. You need to do the feasibility of the production that will be there. Is it enough? And then all kinds of technical feasibilities also, and start planning for all of this. So Heidi, what would you see of this planning and permitting phase? What kind of companies, what kind of people?
So we have a lot of project developer companies that are, some of them are tiny, small ones using a lot of consultants and sources outside the company. Some are traditional Finnish energy companies that are doing also wind power project development from the scratch. Then we would have companies from other countries that are specialized in renewable energy project development production all over the globe, possibly, but that's what they do, so they wouldn't have any fossil energy projects. So very different types of companies. Some are new in energy, some are traditional in energy. But especially in this phase, it becomes very clear that wind power is essentially for character such that it has touching points to many different fields of business and activity. Talking about wind analysis, wind measurements is very different from acoustics or biological studies or archaeological studies. Like a lot of different things are done. And also when talking about teams doing this, it makes a good team if there's a biologist and somebody who knows acoustics or wind analysis, production analysis type of thing. So certainly you could do this with very different backgrounds.
And also, of course, they need people working with wind in the spatial planning in the municipalities who give the building permits. So it's also a wide area of companies, and also the developers will subcontract some of the analysis from specialized consultancies. And yes, so there are many companies working here. And of course, then going more that when you have the finances, also financial people need to be involved from the beginning. And then when you finally get the preparing for construction, you need to then have the financing plan and financing decision. And then you start tendering, procurement, and all this phase before you can actually start constructing. You need to buy the equipment and make a plan for everything that you need to procure for the project.
Sorry, Hannele, there's a question which seems to be good for this moment. So in the question and answer box, there's a question for Hannele and Heidi. Where does carbon emissions assessment come in these phases?
The carbon emission assessment normally is part of the UVA process, the environmental impact assessment. It may be needed generally for discussing with the stakeholders, for example, and discussing with the planners, perhaps discussing with even in future. You could think that there are some financiers to get a financing. There would be some instances that would make sure that this is a green investment, for example. So you could use these in different ways. But yeah, I would say it would come in the sort of planning and permitting phase mostly.
And something I could add, now we've been talking about different types of specialists and really deep skills in something, but also what is needed a lot is generalists who can run the project, who can do the project management, who can touch different things, learn quickly different things. So also that is very valuable.
That's right. I think, how is it, Sanna, with the timing? Should we speed up a little bit?
Maybe
For the construction and production and dismantling? That's a lot about engineering there, and of course construction work as such, and erection, but also like commissioning and testing and the grid connection. And then in the production phase, you need to control, you need to monitor, you need to sell your energy, you need to do the maintenance, and then dismantling, which hopefully will be after 30 years. Sort of the lifetime nowadays is 30 to 35 years even, and it used to be 20 years before. So also the lifetime is longer now, but then at the end you would need some dismantling. But basically, Heidi, if you want to quickly just summarize some of the last bits here.
A lot of engineering is needed.
Yeah.
A lot of engineering is needed, but also a lot of other skills. So we have some other slides. Can we quickly step through them?
Yes, you have. You can use a couple of minutes, and then we'll hand over to Iko.
So here's some tips how to get started entering wind. So we have now some education available. FITech is providing some, and there will be some more information available about that. But also when doing school study assignments, your master's thesis, anything, it's if you want to work in wind, search for topics that are related to wind, as there's not that much education in place yet. So also this kind of assignments play a role, and you can show your interest with these. Open applications, many companies are recruiting continuously, so it's not necessary to wait for open vacancies, which we also list on our website when we happen to hear about the positions. So visit our website and find jobs there. Student membership of the associations is free of cost, and we post especially open vacancies to students, so easy to follow also in social media. And we have collected the education possibilities on our website as well, so that's good source of information. We have something more there. Yeah, the possible employer. So this is just, we have over 230 member companies in the association at the moment, and it's growing. These are only logos of the biggest ones. So as said, there are also a lot of small companies, and you can find a list of companies on our website. but it's companies in various fields doing a lot of different things, either directly or indirectly to wind, related to wind. Also, grid operators are employing a lot of talents related to all energy, and Hannele mentioned the authorities. And Finland is known for having a whole lot of manufacturing industry, producing components for wind turbines. We are an exception. Usually wind power is employing a lot in countries where it has been built for a long time. But Finland had the industry before we had the turbine fleet in Finland. So a lot of open positions also in the industry side. And also a lot of new business is created around green transition of energy. So come work in energy.
Yes,
Thank you.
indeed. For the new business opportunities, all the hydrogen economy is very much related to wind as well. So yes, hope to see you in the courses and in the field.
Thank you, Hannele, Heidi. We move on to hear Iko Jänberg's career story from Despro Engineering, and probably even before that. You can still place questions for Heidi and Hannele on the Q&A, and we can address them later on. But Iko, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So my name is Iko Jänberg, and I'm here to tell you about my career story. So please, maybe next slide. So these are some milestones along the career. So, well, the first and the most important is that I was born in Loimaa, Finland, 32 years ago. So I would say, at least I would say, I'm a young professional myself, but I'm been in this wind energy sector now almost a decade. But then from Loimaa, it was a great place to born and raise. I moved to Tampere and got my Master's of Science in Electrical Engineering. And after that, or during my studies, I got the spark for wind power, and I got to the wind energy business, doing first main contracting, and after that, what I'm doing now, renewable energy consulting. So that is something that also Finnish Wind Power Association has the same path, as they are now also moving to whole renewable energy sector. But please, let's go on. So I got a lot of pictures here. I get paid for the number of pictures, so that's why, and I think those are most interesting parts also. So, well, so I started my studies in 2012 after Army, and so I studied electrical engineering, and it was something I don't know why I chose electrical engineering. I think it was easy to get in, so I didn't even have to go to these tests. So I think maybe that affected on my choice. But I think now, looking back, it was a good choice. And then I interested in renewable energy, and we had this wind power course there in Tampere University of Technology, and there is actual footage from the site visit. So from the course, we get to visit this one wind farm site. I believe it was in Honkajoki, and there was, I would say, those wind turbines are a bit lower than 3 megawatts, maybe 2.6 or so. So it was a moment of spark for me. That is when I knew I wanted to work for wind energy, and then I did my everything so I would get the first summer training spots and so on in the sector. Later, I graduated as a Master of Science, and yeah, there's about 7 years from that. But okay, so that's about my studies. So maybe, please, next one. So during my studies, I got the summer trainees vacancy at Empower. So this is the first touch for the actual wind power construction site. So I get to be a site engineer, and I saw what happened at the construction site. So in the picture from the left, there is road construction works ongoing. So they have removed the topsoil, and then first layers are being constructed. And then there is in the right part there is a wind farm. Wind turbine foundation, so there is reinforcement works ongoing. So those were. It was really interesting to see how the wind farm infrastructure is getting constructed. So that was my first summer trainee job. And then next slide, please. So then I get the first full-time work as an electrical engineer. So I got this position at NCC, which later became Infra Builders. So at first I did some electrical designing, as you can see in the left picture, used AutoCAD to draw lines, and then we ordered the cables, and then as you can see from the picture in the right part, that then those lines I draw maybe a year ago, they became true, and then there were cables that would connect the wind turbines and so on. So I designed those and then supervised the electrical balance of plant. So for clarity, the balance of plant means everything else except the wind turbines. So the infrastructure work, road building, foundations, substations, cabling, and so on. So the electrical balance of plant is referred also as EPOP, includes the cabling, substation, possible overhead lines, and so on. And the next slide, please. So then I get more and more responsibility doing. So then I was managing the whole electrical balance of plant. So I think I got to see the more bigger picture, as there is also a bigger picture of the substation which is being built in the left photo, and then also when everything was ready, the wind turbines were spinning, and then we get to hand over the ready constructed works, and we had this takeover inspection, and there were also some other inspector, as you can see from the right picture. So in 6 years, I think I got to build about 10 wind farms from scratch to commissioning and energizing. So it was really interesting. I'd say it was really interesting to be part of these kind of big construction projects. Next slide, thanks. So then I moved to this renewable energy consulting. So not only wind power, but also solar and batteries, as they are also starting to boom. So I joined Despro about 3 years ago. Despro as a company has been founded 9 years ago. It has offices around Finland, so not abroad, 12 offices. We have about 120 experts working in several fields of engineering. We are fully owned by the staff. Our turnover has been growing each year about 20%, being last year a bit over 10 million euros. Next slide. So here is the what areas of expertise we have. So I would say, in a nutshell, we are experts of electrical engineering, but we also have other areas of expertise. So we design, do the construction management, do several measurements and consulting for the electrical grids from the low voltage to high voltage, even 400 kilowatts, meaning the highest voltage level for the overhead lines. Substations, then the telecommunications and smart cities, including lighting, and then renewables, which is my business unit that I have been growing for 3 years now. There's a wind turbine spinning, but we also, as said, we also work with solar and batteries. Then we have also new areas like industry, like hydrogen, green hydrogen, which is growing, I would say, in the coming years quite a bit. Then the railroads also. So this is a company I'm representing, and well, in the coming years, we need more and more experts for the, well, everything related to electrical, so electrical designing. It doesn't matter if it's a substation, overhead line, medium voltage, low voltage, then the telecommunication like ICT systems and so on, and the construction management. So all kind of expertise are needed. Okay, so this is a company I'm representing. Maybe next slide, thanks. So what I'm doing at Despro, so I think at first, at least at first, when I started, I was the first person working for the renewables full time. So at the time, my most important task was to develop and deliver new services. So here's some pictures. From the left side, you can see a happy guy who has just bought over 100,000 euros cost measurement device. So we bought this device, and this is used for cable measurements done at the wind farms. After buying that, we have I think measured maybe, I don't know, tens of wind farm cables. In the center, you can see all kind of graphs. They are from simulation models and simulation results. So we started doing this PFFC, PSCAD, power factory network modeling, which Fingrid requires for the power plants. And then in the right side, we also started doing the construction management, and it's, I think, every time I visit the wind farm and I see the wind turbine, and maybe sometimes these large cranes, they are I would say magnificent view. So that is one of my most important tasks at Despro. So maybe next slide, thanks. Then obviously, when those services have been developed, we have to do the sales and representing. In the pictures, there's a few events, but mostly the sales are having Teams meetings with customers, having live meetings with customers. But then again, we have this good exhibits and other happenings that also Wind Power Association is organizing. So sometimes I get to present myself, my company, and some products at any fairs and exhibitors. And I think the picture which is at the right left side is me at the Verkostomessut, and at the center, we are having good time at Wind Finland, which is the biggest wind energy event in Finland. And at the right picture, we are smiling as we had this 1,000 wind turbines gala. I think it was last year, and I believe after that we have built quite many new turbines also. Right, next slide, thanks. But the most important, as I'm developing and selling these services, I'm leading the business unit, which is called renewables. So from one person, we have grown to, well, next Monday we are having 12 persons. So in the picture, I believe there is 9. So we keep growing each year rapidly. And then I obviously have to see some kind of like these financial numbers and other boring stuff. instead of visiting the sites all the time. Yeah, so that's about it, I think. Is there any? Yes, so thanks. Any questions for me? Please, you can connect with me at LinkedIn at least. I hope I get to share my spark with you.
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, thank you, Iko. Now there is a minute if someone wants to place a question, but before that, are you also, Iko, in your team, are you hiring and do you find people for the positions if you are?
Yes, I'm all the time hiring. So at the moment we are looking to grow our own engineering team, which needs the construction management, project managers, project engineers. At the moment, we are also looking for a manager for the whole team, and then other expertise what we are currently all the time seeking are these network modeling experts. So modeling with the BSSC, BSCAT, or PowerFactor.
Hey, thank you. Are there any other questions? I don't see hands or anything in the QA. Well, thank you, Iko. And if someone places a question later in the Q&A, then we'll address that. But perhaps we can move to then Ilona's career story. Please, Ilona from OX2. Did I pronounce it correctly?
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you. So I'm happy to be here sharing my story, my career story that seems like a lot of coincidence after another, but then as a big picture, it actually makes sense quite a bit. And I'll try to talk a bit besides myself, also about others. I've sort of collected some examples of in our company what kind of backgrounds there is to highlight the diversity in backgrounds that you need in wind power that Heidi and Hannele talked about earlier. And I'm also gonna, I have a bit of an offshore focus here because I'm currently working in the offshore projects, but I've started with the onshore projects originally also, but a bit with the offshore focus now. We can go to the first slide. So first, a few words about the company. OX2 is a renewable energy company, and the sort of slogan currently is powering the great shift, that refers to the true electrification of the society and doing it in a sustainable way. And that's very much in the core of our business. And we can go to the next slide. That maybe sheds a bit more light in the company. We're of Swedish origin and listed in the Nasdaq Stockholm. One of the biggest wind power developers in whole Europe, and very Europe focused, as you can see in the map. Biggest countries are Sweden and Finland, actually. And then if you look at the map, you can see we also have an Australian section that was bought a year ago. But a strong focus in the Northern Europe, I would say. Next slide, please. We don't have to go into these sort of boring numbers here. But this picture here with the 4 of our technologies describes quite well what we focus on. So onshore wind, offshore wind, solar, and energy storage. And as said before, I'll focus a bit on with the offshore perspective in my later slides. And maybe from the offshore, I can say that if onshore wind, it's very dynamic. It's a quite young sector, but offshore is even younger and even more dynamic in a way that most of us working in the offshore, it's always doing some things in the first time, thinking things in a very new perspective. There's only 11 offshore turbines installed in Finland, 11 in Pori, and then few sort of these nearshore turbines. And then there's a lot of project development activities now. So companies are developing offshore projects quite a bit currently. We as one of them. Then we can go to the next slide. I'll start with my current role, and then I'll go a bit backwards in time after that. But I work as a permit manager in our offshore wind team now. I used to work as my previous role was a development project manager. So I had one of our big offshore projects and I was running it. And currently I'm a permit manager, which is more, it's sort of quite new role. And it's not so clear or exact tasks, let's say. It's more like on the right-hand corner, there's random, whatever surprise happens to be land on my table, then I'll usually take care of it. And all in all, we're quite dynamic team. So we have certain roles, but it's always who has the best sort of skill sets and time, then that person takes care of it. So it's very, very dynamic work. But as I said, it's quite new industry, the offshore wind in Finland, especially we are having few projects in the exclusive economical zone, and it has never been permitted in Finland, such project before. So everything has to be thought quite from the new perspective, the whole permit strategy. I'm working quite a lot with that. We're doing assessments on the environmental impact. You have to think their methods in a new way. Everything is sort of, you can't take the old examples, let's say, but you have to think it through in a new way. Yes. And then, well, maybe from the stakeholder management also, that as we later, in the next slide, I think we go through my training. I'm a biologist by training. So for example, with the stakeholder management, I work with a lot with the NGOs, or if there's nature protection organizations with authorities regarding environmental issues, those are usually on my table. We can go to the next slide. So here we can go through my career path. I tried to summarize it here. I'm a biologist, and that was not coincidence. I knew that from quite young age, but I didn't really know where it will end up. So sort of ending up at this situation, it was not planned, as I don't think many in wind power, because when most of us working here were studying, there wasn't sort of, wind power was still such a baby as an industry. But I've studied biology in the University of Turku with a marine focus, and also did exchange studies in Canada that gave even more focus in the offshore part. And then I spent 3 years studying the seafloor of the Western Gulf of Finland. So I worked for the governmental organization Metsähallitus, and I was diving, I was using the underwater camera, doing sampling, and we just tried to find out, what's under the surface, because it's not very well known. And those were very fun years. And as a coincidence, it's sort of, as all things come together, I'm actually now working with a lot of that kind of data that I used to collect. So somehow life goes in circles and you find something you started later on in life. Then, as I sort of always knew that I necessarily, research is not where I want to focus, but I want to go more in the sort of industry, let's say. Then 2013, and this is sort of where the accident happens. I didn't plan, but there was an advertisement at Pöyry, big consultancy company, that they're looking for wind power expert, and your background could be electrical engineer, physicist with meteorology as a major, or biologist. So this already describes how big variety in backgrounds you can have for certain job. And I joined then the Pöyry, and I call those years, I was a fake engineer because I did a lot of the technical studies. But as what I see important here is that as there's not much training in Finland, or you cannot major in wind power, let's say. So many of the things are about having the good background for it, and then you learn while you work. And I think that's very important part of what I would like to emphasize in this webinar also. And then from the consultancy, I joined OX2 early 2021 in the offshore development, because I always sort of knew that I want to work with the offshore project where I can combine my previous roles and backgrounds. Then we can go to the next slide. It doesn't. Yeah, the previous was just maybe highlighting a bit of what I found important in all those parts. Maybe just go back to the previous one, if possible. One thing to highlight maybe, as I have exchange studies here, but if you are still a student and want to go in the wind power and you still haven't done your exchange year and you want to do it, then one tip would be to go abroad to a country that has matured wind power education. For example, let's say Denmark, if you think wind power technology, or other countries with similar backgrounds. Now we can go back to this. So the previous one was about me, but here I gathered I asked from OX2 Finland, the project development managers, so people who are running projects onshore, offshore, and solar PV projects. I asked about their educational backgrounds, and it's listed here. And as you can see, of course, there's a lot of engineering that can be expected, but there's a lot of also, for example, one majoring in English philology. And then there's, real estate, one from regional sciences. So I think this gives quite a good highlight that if you, for example, work as a project development manager of a wind power project, it's sort of about having good background for it, but then it's more about learning through the process and having the sort of, as a project manager, for example, you need to be able to handle sort of multiple things and be a generalist in a way, working with the specialized experts. So I think it's a lot about your characteristics also. Then we can go to the next one. So the previous one was about the project managers, but then I've here listed about sort of our functions at OX2 Finland, and maybe highlight few skill sets that there is currently in the company. I talked about the project development here earlier with the different skill sets, but then, for example, there's land management, and there's a lot of people in land management who worked before in the forestry companies. So the people who are used to negotiation with landowners, and now they work in wind power, because we need a lot of people. There's a lot of landowners in Finland, so we need a lot of people who can drink a lot of coffee and talk with the landowners. Then there's GIS. That is a lot about the spatial data that wind power, because of its nature, it's not a single block, but it's more like the turbines are around and the cables. So you need a lot of GIS to plan the project and permit it. Then, for example, we have TCM there, which is turbine commercial management. So they're the people running the turbines who are already producing. And in the TCM, you have, for example, you have the electrical engineers, the practical people also who work with the installations, and then you have the people who sort of manage and run the wind farms. So there's quite a big variety of backgrounds there. And transactions have business people, construction, of course, construction people, etc. And then we are a company that currently, at least, we don't own assets. So we don't own the wind farms. We run them for others. But then if there's a company who owns owns the assets, then it's of course goes even wider, the skills needed. And regarding the future skill sets, if we think of offshore in Finland and the projects are going ahead and we get to the realization phase, so we actually start constructing them, we just talked with my team that we don't actually come up with any profession that we don't need at that stage, because they are huge projects. So basically you need everything from the food and doctors to the engineers, so everything. We can go into the next slide. Yes, and this is my last slide, and then I tried to gather a bit of lessons learned and to be learned regarding my career. And I would say a lot of the lessons learned are more mental, about sort of growing as a person and expert, but of course there's a lot of substance there also. But I would say that the substance comes along the work. When you work, you learn the substance, and of course you can do additional courses if there is courses on those topics available. But a lot of it is more like growing as an expert. And I think the most important lesson I've learned so far is that patience, energy projects, they take time. They go forward and then they go backward and they wait, and then they might go forward again. So you need a lot of patience. And regarding the substance, I said before, then of course I've learned a lot about permitting, environmental studies, technical studies, about project feasibility, communication. Sort of as a generalist, you sort of learn a bit of everything, but then you luckily have the really good experts that are real experts on more detailed matters. Yeah, well, maybe I can, from these lessons learned, I could also sort of bring up the ask questions part. Usually people are a bit shy about asking questions, but there's no stupid questions. And usually when you ask a question, you might notice that it's not very clear to other people either, especially with these new kind of projects. So don't be afraid to ask questions. And usually offering solutions to problems also works better than just stating out the problems in these kind of projects. And next I'm planning to learn more patience, as the projects are big, so they will take time and there will definitely be setbacks, etc. Yes, I think that's...
Okay, thank you, Ilona. And actually there is a question for you. Maybe Fanny could read it out loud.
Yes, there's a question. What is your thought on the resistance of the offshore wind power in Sweden?
Yes, so maybe as a background there, how far I understand the Swedish situation is that the current government is very nuclear focused or pro-nuclear, and it's sort of large offshore projects and nuclear projects are sort of competing, especially when trying to produce electricity for southern Sweden. The transmission in Sweden from north to south is not very good. So, well, my personal thought on that, I'm not against nuclear, but I think their idea of how simple it is to build nuclear is a bit false. If you think of the latest Finnish nuclear projects, they've been quite complicated and taken quite a bit of time. So let's see what the next government thinks. But in Sweden, the offshore wind would be a very good solution for the southern Sweden energy problems. I hope that answered the question.
There is a, I'll ask Johanna to place here our slide that has some links to training that is available, but it's there so you can explore in your own time. So we can still take questions if you like. in the meantime while I wait. So here are a few QR codes. One to FITech, where you can search for courses. Also on hydrogen economy, we have a training module in that, and renewable energy, including then solar and wind power. The Finnish Wind Power Association has collected a lot of available trainings to their website. And if you are looking for degree programs in Finland, you would find some programs in renewable energy. Like Hannele said, not a degree program in wind power as such, but in renewable energy at Aalto University, Tampere University, which you can find in study info. But now, if there are more questions to our panelists, we can use the last couple of minutes to address those. Okay.
There's a question about open university courses.
Yes, open university courses as well. Open university courses, for example, in the case of Aalto University, most of the tech courses would be in the FITech curriculum. But of course, you can also explore each university's open university courses. They are always the same courses as the degree curriculum has, but also other people can study them via Open University. There was also a question if we can place, we could place the direct links in the message section as well. Just a minute. Maybe, Heidi, would you like to say something about the courses that you have?
There's a question now on the Q&A box.
Okay, please go.
So perhaps you already discussed about this, but what is the reusable plan regarding the turbines, like after 30 years?
So I guess this is about the recycling mostly. So about 85 to 95% of a wind turbine can be recycled with current methods already. The most difficult part has been the blades that are the thick components that are difficult for recycling, no matter whether they come from wind turbine blades or boats or aviation, car industries, or for the manufacturing industry. Like we have a lot of pipes and such things, sports equipment made of these materials. At the moment, we can reuse them so that it's 50% recycling, 50% energy use. It's called co-processing. They are treated in Kuusakoski-Hyvinkää plant in Finland, and then they are taken to cement kiln where they replace fossil fuels and materials. So good use for circulate use for them at the moment already, but also a lot of recycling solutions are being developed at the moment.
Thank you, Heidi. I think we have consumed our time. You will later find the recording at fitech.io. Thank you for attending. And I hope that this was inspiring so that many of you want to take the courses and search for a career in wind power. Thank you all the panelists for your inspiring presentations.
Thank you for hosting this.
Bye.
Bye.